You know, Wikipedia is a fascinating place on the web. It's a resource that all of us have used many, many times before, and have probably been spammed with a lot of donation requests as well, even though they very much don't need them. At all. Even remotely. But that is a discussion for another time. Someone recently sent me the deletion discussion page for a specific article. That is on the Odin programming language. Now, Odin, it's a fairly niche C-like in very big air quotes, programming language. It's not super popular. Maybe you've heard somebody talk about it here and there. It does have a very niche amount of production usage, specifically by Jenga effects with Embergen, Geogen, and Liquigen. These are for fire, terrain, and water generation respectively. These are used in Unreal Engine 5, and these are used by some really big companies like Bethesda and Capcom and Codemasters and Warner Bros. And a bunch of other places. So even though it's a really niche language, it's very likely you've played something, you've seen a movie that actually makes use of something written in Odin. As for me though, most of what I've heard about with the language is in regards to game development, specifically with a library known as Raylib. Now, Raylib can be used with a bunch of different languages, like, where is the thing? The scroll past it, right here. C#, Go, Python, Rust, Zig, and a bunch of other things, but Odin is on the list, and there are some people that do promote using Raylib specifically with Odin. Odin is a relatively new language, especially relatively new in people actually talking about it, but it does have some absolutely devout followers. Like every niche language out there, there are people that are devoutly following V or D or any of these other languages, so there should be no surprise that Odin has the same. And Odin had a Wikipedia article, but not anymore. And what I thought would be fun was to go over the reasons for keeping the article, for deleting the article, and try to get an understanding of what goes through the mind of a Wikipedia editor, of a Wikipedia moderator, you might say, if you want to compare them to a Reddit moderator. And by the end of this video, that comparison, I think, is going to make a lot more sense than it probably should. The Odin programming language. This is a non-notable programming language that has received no in-depth coverage from reliable sources. The article's current sources consist of developers' personal sites, random logs that happen to use the language, and a self-published ebook. Coverage in academic research consists of trivial mentions. You're going to see how fundamentally broken and confusing the inclusion policy is for Wikipedia, because there are very few languages that this would even cover. Delete. Yep, there's nothing to go on here. Inventing a programming language is much easier than convincing other people to adopt it, write books about it, and get those books published by actual authors. There is this weird emphasis on Wikipedia, and you're going to see this more as we go through the comments, that we still live in, like, the 1980s, and people are publishing programming books, and people are writing programming magazines, and this is a thing that is really common to be done. Most of the books you see on programming languages are going to be self-published books, because that's the way it works, because self-publishing now is really, really easy. Delete. I found one independent source talking about it, but it's unclear whether that website is user-generated or if it's an actual publication process. Either way, one source isn't enough for notability. There are really serious journalists that self-publish articles that used to work at some notable journalistic outlet, and then they post everything on either a blog site or one of the countless, like, big hosted blog sites out there a lot of people use. If that person is reputable when they are at a well-known outlet, do they then suddenly not become reputable when they leave that outlet? That's sort of like the thinking that exists here. As for this specific site, though, this is on Hacker Noon. This is something where it seems like pretty much anyone can publish to it. It's not really a super important site, but you're going to notice that the content and the style you see here is very similar to something else a bit later in the thread. Keep. There's an uprising of modern C-like languages that's been getting traction, and it seems crazy to delete the pages of any of them just because a few people seem to be motivated by personal grudges or something against the ones that aren't their favorite. Odin, Zig, Jai, C3 are all on the frontier of this movement, and Wikipedia refraining to cover any of them would be frankly absurd. The response to that, the mere assertions that there is a movement and that this language is on the frontier of it, is not sufficient to justify an article here. There have been C derivatives since the 90s, many of which nobody ever used, and many of which already have an article. We need reliable, independent sources before we can say anything about any of them, let alone devote a whole page to one of them. Keep. I understand the need for sources, but the sad part is that computer programming magazines are all but dead today, and they used to be the primary source for this kind of information. Also, who's to say that a random programming magazine is a more viable source, is a more reputable source than a blog post by some random person? In both cases, it's a random person writing it. Also, there have been countless cases of articles and magazines just making up nonsense. Currently, there are a few new languages aimed at the C niche: Zig, Odin, Jai, C3, V, and Hare. Zig, I believe, is from 2016, Jai 2014, Odin 2017, C3 2019, V 2019, and Hare 2019. Of these, Zig has the most traction. You'll see people who are big fanatics of Zig. Jai has a lot of pent-up interest, but is still in closed beta. I believe the article on Jai is also nominated for deletion, and since then has actually been deleted and has been merged into the Jonathan Blow article. If we look at Zig, the motivation for its inclusion are two articles in 2016 and 2017. This is funny because the language had virtually no use in 2017. So some random outlet thought the language looked exciting, even though no one was using it at the time. That was justification enough to include the article. If we look after 2020, there are virtually no mentions of even Zig, so how can we explain this? Well, I already suggested the answer. There are no computer programming magazines anymore. There's a few little niche ones here and there, but nothing like there used to be. The discussions are in blogs, in YouTube channels, etc. For example, you'll see people such as the Primogen, Mr. Primogem, cover languages, and here indeed both Zig, Jai, and Odin come up frequently. Why is the Primogen less of a reputable source than some magazine that nobody reads? I don't have an answer for you. You could say, oh, they have a production committee, they have a pipeline for verifying the correctness of things, but if they get things wrong just as much as a YouTuber does, what's the difference? We're now at a point where Jai and Odin are nominated for deletion, while V, with a much smaller user base and with interest in the news these days, has a page. Even Hare, the arguably less used of these languages, have a magazine mention, and that is on this page here. It's a magazine, I guess, of some description. It exists. Yeah, it had 609 views. But I guess it does exist. It's very important. Maybe we could even say Zensi fits Wikipedia criteria better than Odin. It has this one right here, which again is some random website, which, is it more notable? Is it more reputable than some random blog post on Hacker Noon? I don't really see why. What I'm trying to say with this is that using mentions of the language in computer magazines as the criteria is inherently flawed. Other magazines covering languages are hit and miss. V, Zensi, and Hair all have some coverage, but they rarely amount to more than repeats of press releases of their first official versions, which absolutely should not be a criterion for notability. An interesting comparison is GitHub Linguist, which is including languages for syntax highlighting on GitHub with a minimum criteria for use on GitHub. And from this, we'll see there are not a lot, but there are quite a few projects on GitHub that make use of Odin considerably more than a language like Hair or C3 or Chapel or Jai or V. And when Zig got its article, it probably was even less than where Odin is. Here's the response. Just because other languages have articles doesn't mean this article should exist. CWP Wax. This is for arguments to avoid in deletion discussions. Wax specifically is what about Article X? When I say Wikipedia editors are a lot like Reddit moderators, this is what I mean. What about Article X isn't a rebuttal? That's like saying, oh, that's what about it. And that's not a rebuttal to anything when there is a direct comparison between the two. We're not talking about, oh, well, there's an article on this random fruit. Why not include this programming language? Those are not like comparisons that make any sense. That's understandable. But if we're talking about niche programming languages and one niche programming language has an article, there is an article that exists for another niche programming language that is more popular than that. That is something you can directly compare, and the comparison there makes sense. Like, you can't just say, oh, whataboutism, that's not valid. That's not how this works. At least, it's not how it works in any sensible discussion. It is how it works on Wikipedia, though. If there aren't reliable sources, then we can't write an article. Blogs and YouTube shows are in the vast majority of cases not reliable sources. If the programming community isn't publishing reliable sources anymore, well, then we can't cover what they do. That's their problem. Nothing Wikipedia can do about it. What is the function of Wikipedia existing? If not to document things that exist, right? Why does the site even exist if you cannot document things that are happening? What is the function? This link here, though, this goes to somewhere really amusing. Verifiability, self-published sources. Anyone can create a personal webpage, self-publish a book, or claim to be an expert. Self-published materials such as books, patents, newsletters, personal websites, open wikis, personal or group blogs, as distinguished from news blogs, content farms, podcasts, internet forums postings, and social media postings are largely not acceptable as sources. Self-published sources may be considered reliable if published by an established subject matter expert whose work in the relevant field has previously been published by reliable, independent publications. Be careful when using such sources. If the information in question is suitable for inclusion, someone else will likely have published it in independent, reliable sources. Never use self-published sources as third-party sources about living people, even if the author is an expert, well-known professional, or writer. So if you have some field where there's not that much popularity in it, but there's a lot of people using it because maybe there's just not that many people writing about it, that's just not valid for inclusion in Wikipedia because reasons. Also, as I was saying before, what makes having a publisher any more reliable than self-publishing? There are these publishers out there which are basically just content farm publishers which don't really have proper editing structures and just publish out nonsense. As a reminder, do you know what the most published books were when the printing press was invented? How to identify witches. Having a publisher, being an established legacy news media outlet, does not make you any more reliable than a self-published source. This is just like Wikipedia is stuck well in the past, and I don't know what they need to do to fix this, because none of this makes sense to me. From the next person, It's wrong to lash out or finger point at other languages because Odin failed at becoming more popular and being written about by reputable sources. Odin is nearly 10 years old, so it has nobody and nobody else to blame for this failure but itself. Zig, VLang, Crystal, Mojo were easy to find for our 2026 language recommendations, linking to these articles here. Articles I use in giant air quotes. This is some random blog that just recommends languages. This is also some random blog that recommends languages. Why are these reputable sources when this isn't? This and this are effectively self-published, but this is a different thing. Why? Honestly, it just seems like there is this sort of, how would I say it? Bias? Yeah, just like you use the rules as a justification to delete something, you don't actually care about the rules. And this isn't an article, this is just a listing of popular repos on GitHub. So, yeah. Not sure why that one's even included here. It's reasonable to pose the question that Odin might be more of a vanity project and self-promotion. The language is very strongly tied and centers around the outspoken persona of Ginger Bill, as if a cult leader. Jai and Jonathan Blow can be put into this category, but are way more successful with that strategy and have much wider following. In either case, Wikipedia and other languages are not to blame for lack of notability for Odin as a language versus that of a person or leader. There could be something with, like, wide industry deployment that has millions of users using it, but if some random news outlet doesn't write an article, not notable. Nah, it's not notable. Who cares? Why is it different if a big company self-publishes or releases a press release? Don't think about it. Delete. I was unable to find any sources related to this particular programming language. Sources now in the article aren't enough to show notability. Keep. But largely because I disagree with Wikipedia's guidelines on how to determine notability and reliability. The sources are reliable enough for us to have confidence in their accuracy, and the subject is notable enough to have huge amounts of secondary sources discussing it. Sources that Wikipedia arbitrarily regards as unreliable due to superficial factors and convention, despite most of the sources being very accurate. That's an important point there. There is no consideration on whether or not the source is accurate, only if the source is of their arbitrary definition for notable. A source could be complete nonsense, making everything up, but if it's, I don't know, pick your favorite news outlet to hate, if they published it, notable. Keep. Rather than go after languages that are actually well known first, maybe begin with hobby projects someone started in 2021 and then abandoned, like the toy language. Setting up Jai and Odin for deletion, despite them being on a stable trajectory upwards by setting a high bar, looks ludicrous when there are so many programming languages here which are like toy. Once there's actually a consistent bar for deletion, revisit deletion. I'm not saying this article shouldn't be deleted. I'm saying look at other languages not up for deletion yet. It doesn't look like this should be deleted. And again, what aboutism? Other stuff exists. It's the same thing again. And again, since this comment was originally posted, that article has also been deleted. Delete. Strawman arguments do not prove notability. See no significant coverage from established reliable publications. Distractions by mentioning other languages does not help as well. Even more so when upon inspection, many of those other languages have more contributors and stars on GitHub, as well as more published materials from independent reliable sources, which, a lot of the languages don't. This is just straight up lying. Some of them do, but a lot of them don't. Delete clearly fails notability. The argument to keep an article without reliable source because there are no computer program magazines anymore is ludicrous. We have online and digital computer program related magazines, Linux Magazine, Infosecurity Magazine, and Analytics, India Mag, and Wired.com. Why are any of these more reputable than a random blog? Somehow Odin, in all the years of its existence, could never manage to be covered by any of them, while other languages could. Speaks volumes to its lack of notability. Something of note, the edit history shows Carl Zielinski, who is the creator of the Odin book, writing some of the article. Now, that, I guess, is a legitimate complaint. Sure, fair enough. The one legitimate complaint in the entire thread. So, this article ended up being deleted, and as you can probably tell, being a Wikipedia editor is very much like being a Reddit moderator. You interpret the rules how you feel like interpreting them. You decide what is and is not a reputable source, and you know, that's just how it goes. There's nothing that can really be said about it, and yeah. So I hope you learned something about what it's like to be in the mind of the Wikipedia editors, the people who sit around all day editing this site. So if you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe, and I guess if you have any other funny articles for deletion, send them my way. I don't know if I'll talk about them, but I'll certainly at least consider it. So, subscribe, like the video, all that good stuff. If you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon Scribes Daily Bearer Pay linked in the description down below. That's gonna be it for me, and this is so dumb.